In this episode, we begin with a part of risk work that often sounds more technical than it really is, because facilitating stakeholder selection of recommended risk responses is mostly about helping people make sound business decisions when uncertainty is involved. A beginner can easily assume that cybersecurity risk professionals simply identify a problem and then tell the organization what to do next, but that is not how mature risk work usually happens. Real organizations have leaders, budget owners, process owners, technical teams, legal advisors, and business managers, and each of them may feel the impact of a risk in a different way. The person supporting the decision is rarely there to force an answer. That person is there to make the situation understandable, compare sensible response choices, surface trade-offs clearly, and help the right people choose a path they can support, defend, and carry out. When you hear the word facilitating in this context, think less about running a meeting and more about guiding a decision so that risk is treated seriously, business needs are respected, and the outcome is practical instead of theoretical. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to start is with the meaning of risk response itself. A risk response is the action, posture, or decision an organization chooses after it understands a risk well enough to decide what should happen next. Many beginners think the response is always to reduce the risk, but that is only one possible direction. Sometimes the organization changes the activity that creates the risk. Sometimes it adds safeguards. Sometimes it shifts part of the financial impact to another party through contracts or insurance. And sometimes it knowingly accepts the exposure because the cost of further action would not make business sense. The important point is that risk response is not just a technical fix. It is a management choice about how the organization will live with, reduce, avoid, or share a particular exposure. Facilitating that choice means helping stakeholders understand the consequence of each option, the effort involved, and the effect each path could have on operations, customers, finances, compliance obligations, and organizational goals. That brings us to stakeholders, because the word can feel vague until you picture who is actually in the room. Stakeholders are the people or groups who either own the risk, are affected by the risk, must fund the response, must approve the decision, or must carry out what is chosen. In a business setting, that may include a department leader, a product owner, an operations manager, a finance representative, a security leader, a technology manager, or someone from legal and compliance. One of the most common beginner mistakes is to assume that the loudest person or most technical person should make the decision alone. In reality, the best decision often comes from seeing the issue through several different lenses at once. A security team may focus on threat reduction, while a business leader may focus on service continuity, and a finance leader may focus on cost and timing. Facilitation helps those perspectives meet in a constructive way so the selected response is not just secure on paper, but workable in the real organization. The reason facilitation matters so much is that risk decisions are rarely obvious. If there were only one sensible choice every time, organizations would not need careful discussion. Most of the time, the decision sits among competing priorities. A stronger safeguard may reduce exposure, but also slow down a critical process. A more expensive option may create better resilience, but it may require funding that was already committed elsewhere. A rapid workaround may lower immediate risk, yet create future maintenance problems. This is why a facilitator must turn a confusing issue into a decision-ready discussion. That means translating technical findings into business language, showing what could happen if nothing changes, and making sure the conversation does not drift into personal preferences or fear-based reactions. The facilitator does not win by sounding smartest. The facilitator wins by helping stakeholders compare realistic choices on common ground, so that the selected response reflects informed judgment rather than confusion, pressure, or guesswork. Before stakeholders can choose among recommended responses, they need a shared understanding of the risk itself. That sounds simple, but it often breaks down when one group is speaking in threat details and another group is thinking in business consequences. A strong facilitator bridges that gap. Instead of centering the discussion on only a vulnerability, a system, or a control weakness, the conversation should connect the exposure to something the organization cares about, such as lost revenue, interrupted service, regulatory consequences, reputational damage, customer frustration, safety concerns, or delayed business goals. When stakeholders understand what is truly at stake, they are much better prepared to judge response options. This also means clarifying the likelihood of the event, the seriousness of the impact, and the assumptions behind the analysis. If those assumptions are hidden or poorly explained, the group may debate the wrong issue. Facilitation at this stage is really about building a common picture so the eventual choice feels grounded, proportionate, and relevant to the business rather than abstract and detached. Once the risk is understood, the next challenge is presenting recommended response options in a way that supports decision-making. A weak approach is to hand stakeholders a preferred solution and expect quick approval. A stronger approach is to show several credible options, explain the expected effect of each one, and highlight the trade-offs honestly. For example, one option may reduce risk substantially, but take 6 months and require new spending, while another may offer partial improvement within a few weeks using existing staff. Another may reduce exposure in one area, but introduce friction in another process. Stakeholders need to see that choosing a response is not the same as choosing perfection. It is choosing the most appropriate path under current business conditions. The facilitator should help the group compare cost, benefit, timing, feasibility, residual exposure, and operational effect without making the discussion feel like a contest. The goal is not to manipulate the room into one answer, but to help people weigh options with clear eyes and shared facts. A useful way to think about recommended responses is through the lens of what the organization is actually trying to preserve or enable. Risk work is sometimes misunderstood as a discipline of saying no, but mature risk facilitation is often about helping the organization move forward with awareness and control. If a company wants to launch a new service, enter a new market, rely on a third party, or modernize an aging process, the risk response decision should be framed around how to support that move responsibly. This changes the tone of the discussion. Instead of asking only how to block something dangerous, stakeholders can ask how to achieve the business goal while staying within acceptable exposure. That is a healthier and more strategic conversation. It keeps the facilitator from being seen as an obstacle and instead positions that person as someone who helps leaders make better choices. For beginners, this is an important shift in mindset because the value of risk management often shows up not in stopping activity, but in guiding activity so that it remains sustainable and defensible. Risk appetite and risk tolerance also shape the selection process, even though those ideas can feel abstract at first. In simple terms, they describe how much uncertainty or potential loss an organization is willing to live with while pursuing its objectives. Facilitation becomes difficult when those boundaries are unclear, because stakeholders may argue from instinct instead of from agreed expectations. One leader may feel a certain exposure is minor, while another sees the same issue as unacceptable. The facilitator helps by connecting the current decision to the organization's broader expectations around financial loss, service disruption, legal exposure, customer harm, or strategic importance. This does not always mean there is a precise formula waiting in the background. Many organizations still depend on informed judgment. Even then, the discussion improves when choices are compared against known priorities and established thresholds. For a beginner, the key lesson is that recommended responses should not be selected only because they sound strong or prudent. They should fit the organization's stated willingness to take risk and its ability to absorb the consequences if events go badly. One of the most important skills in facilitation is helping the conversation stay balanced when stakeholders bring different incentives and biases into the room. A business manager may lean toward acceptance because deadlines are tight. A security professional may lean toward stronger mitigation because the technical weakness is obvious. A finance leader may resist anything that looks costly in the current quarter. An operations leader may worry about disruption more than anything else. None of those reactions are automatically wrong, but each one is incomplete on its own. The facilitator needs to surface those biases without turning the discussion into a conflict. That means asking clarifying questions, testing assumptions, and making sure each person is reacting to the same risk statement and the same option descriptions. It also means watching for common traps such as optimism bias, fear of blame, overconfidence in existing controls, or the belief that doing nothing is somehow a neutral choice. In risk work, doing nothing is still a decision, and facilitation helps stakeholders recognize that clearly. A simple example can make this more concrete. Imagine a company relies on an older customer portal that supports an important revenue stream, but the system has weaknesses that increase the chance of account compromise and service interruption. Replacing the platform would take a long time and cost a great deal. Adding layered safeguards around the current system would reduce exposure more quickly, but would not solve every underlying weakness. Accepting the current risk would avoid near-term disruption, but it would leave the company vulnerable during a busy season. The facilitator's role is not to announce the winner. The role is to help stakeholders understand what each path means for customers, revenue, operations, and future work. The group might decide to apply interim safeguards now, accept some residual exposure for a defined period, and plan a later replacement when resources allow. That is not a perfect outcome, but it may be the most responsible one. Good facilitation helps people reach that kind of realistic decision without pretending there is a magic answer. Communication style matters greatly during these discussions because risk decisions can become emotional very quickly. Technical teams may feel unheard if business leaders simplify the issue too much. Business leaders may feel overwhelmed if security teams speak only in specialized language. A facilitator needs to make the discussion accessible without watering it down. That often means replacing jargon with plain descriptions of cause, effect, consequence, and trade-off. It also means restating complex points so everyone knows what is actually being decided. Another helpful habit is distinguishing facts from assumptions and current conditions from future possibilities. When people lose sight of those differences, meetings drift into speculation and defensiveness. The best facilitation often sounds calm, neutral, and structured even when the issue is serious. For a beginner, this is worth remembering because expertise in risk is not just knowing the concepts. It is being able to guide a conversation so that smart people with different concerns can understand one another well enough to make a clear, supportable choice. Another practical part of facilitation is making sure the decision is connected to accountability. Stakeholders may agree on a recommended response in principle, but a weak process leaves unanswered questions about who approved it, who owns the next step, what constraints were accepted, and what residual exposure remains. Even though detailed planning may come later, the selection stage should still produce clarity about the decision itself. That includes what option was chosen, why it was chosen, what assumptions support it, and what significant concerns remain. This protects the organization from future confusion and helps create continuity if personnel change or new issues appear. It also reduces the chance that people walk away from the meeting with different understandings of what was decided. Beginners sometimes think documentation is just paperwork, but in risk management, it is part of the control environment. It shows that the organization treated the issue seriously, considered alternatives, and made a reasoned choice instead of reacting casually or relying on memory and informal conversation. Escalation is another concept that beginners should understand because not every decision can or should be settled at the first level of discussion. Sometimes stakeholders cannot agree because the trade-offs are too significant, the exposure crosses an important threshold, or the consequences reach beyond one department. In those cases, facilitation includes recognizing when the decision needs to move upward or outward to a different authority. That is not a sign of failure. It is often a sign that governance is working properly. A good facilitator knows when the issue has strategic implications, when the potential impact is too great for local approval, or when risk acceptance would exceed what a team is allowed to decide on its own. The facilitator should then present the issue in a way that helps senior decision-makers act effectively, with clear options and clear consequences. This matters because poor escalation can either hide a serious issue or overwhelm leaders with raw detail. Strong facilitation preserves the essential decision logic while matching the message to the level of authority receiving it. It is also important to understand what successful facilitation does not look like. It does not mean pushing stakeholders toward the response the facilitator personally prefers while pretending to be neutral. It does not mean crowding the discussion with unnecessary technical detail to intimidate others into agreement. It does not mean seeking consensus at any cost if the chosen option would clearly violate the organization's stated boundaries or leave critical exposure unaddressed. Successful facilitation is disciplined, transparent, and honest. It helps decision-makers see the real choices in front of them, including the costs of delay and the consequences of underreacting or overreacting. It also respects that business leaders may sometimes accept residual exposure after hearing the analysis, as long as they have the authority to do so and the decision is properly understood and recorded. For beginners, this is one of the most valuable lessons in the topic. Risk professionals are not there to create the illusion of certainty. They are there to support sound judgment under uncertainty. As you bring all of this together, the core idea becomes easier to hold on to. Facilitating stakeholder selection of recommended risk responses is about enabling informed decisions, not merely presenting findings or advocating controls. The work begins with explaining the risk in business terms, continues through comparing realistic options and trade-offs, and succeeds when the right people can choose a response that aligns with organizational goals, boundaries, and capabilities. Good facilitation gives the discussion structure without making it rigid, and it gives stakeholders clarity without pretending the situation is simpler than it is. Over time, organizations that do this well become better at handling uncertainty because they stop treating risk conversations as isolated technical debates and start treating them as routine decision processes tied to strategy and accountability. For someone new to see risk thinking, that is a powerful takeaway. The value is not only in knowing what a risk response is, but in helping people choose one wisely, consistently, and with a full understanding of what that choice really means.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.